one of the wonderful things that movies can do is bring you to places that obviously you can't see anywhere else in the world or reality, and one of those areas is tales that come from the other side, and that's always been a mainstay in our sort of movie diet. And so my interest has always been in a lot of that dark stuff and a lot of that otherworldly stuff, like in Tales from the Crypt. And the Frighteners is one step beyond all of that.
When my daughter Haley was 18 months old, we were in our basement of our building in New York, and we were doing laundry, and in laundry machines. We weren't like beating it against like rocks or anything. And so we're down there, and she sort of toddled off into this disused room, and there was nothing in this room. I mean, it was literally just cinder block walls and a light bulb in the ceiling, and she just sort of pointed at this wall and said, "Baby, baby." And I said, There's no baby there, sweetheart. That's just a wall. And she looked at me like, baby. And my hairs on the back of my neck went boing. And so I said, let's go get mommy. So we ran upstairs and got my wife, who jumped about 18 inches into the air and said, let's go back down. So we ran back downstairs, and we put Haley in the room, and Haley said, or Leslie said, Haley, show mommy the baby. And Haley went over and was pointing at this thing, and she's sort of tracking it with her finger. And then Leslie said, Haley, can you go kiss the baby? And Haley went over to it and sort of kissed this spot on the wall, and then tracked it with her eyes a little bit more, and then she just kind of stood back and came over like, what next?
I believe that there must be something else other than this reality. We must go somewhere when we die, and I don't know where, but I definitely believe, and I would love to see a ghost, but I've never seen one. I know Peter's seen one.
It was about 6:30 in the morning. It was an old apartment block that we used to be in, and it was like a 100-year-old building. And I was lying in bed. Fran had just gotten up to go and make a cup of coffee, and I was awake. I was certainly wide awake. I wasn't sleeping. And the door of the bedroom was open, and I was lying there, and suddenly a woman comes into the bedroom, in through the door. And my first thought was that, not that it's a ghost, my first thought was she was real. And that was actually really terrifying, because I thought, what's she doing here? You know, there was only Fran and I in the building. And she was also very, very creepy looking, because she had a face that was locked into a scream, like a frozen scream, sort of like quite a terrifying look. And so within a second or two, I'm taking this in. I'm thinking it's a real person. She's got a scream on her face, making no sound, silent. And my heart starts thumping. And then after like 2 or 3 seconds, because all this happens very quickly, after 2 or 3 seconds, I realize that she's a ghost, that she's not real. She's gliding across the floor. She's not actually walking. And also, I guess there was she was like transparent. There was a sort of it didn't feel solid. So I realized I'm looking at a ghost, and that's almost a relief. I mean, it's actually, it's almost a relief that it's not a real person, because they're more dangerous, I'm sure, than ghosts. And so I'm watching her, and she goes across the floor, and she slowly rises in the air, and my eyes are totally locked onto this figure, and then she disappears out of the wall on the other side of the bedroom. And the whole thing took maybe 6 or 7 seconds from the doorway across. And I mean, I was like trembling. It was like I felt exactly the same as you do if you just have a near miss in your car or something, and you just feel kind of weak and your heart's pounding. And I called out to Fran, and she came running in. And now Fran had lived in this apartment for like 5 years, prior to this. And I said to Fran, I think I've seen a ghost. And the first thing that she said to me, and this is true, the first thing she said to me was it a woman with a screaming face? And I said, yeah, she had a screaming face. And Fran said that about 3 years earlier, she had woken up in the middle of the night. She was by herself and opened her eyes, and at the foot of the bed was a woman with a screaming face who was standing at the foot of the bed staring at her. And this was the same room. And so, that's the sort of thing that you can't make up. I mean, Fran had never told me about that experience that she'd had. And then I saw the same ghost, 3 years later. So I don't know. I mean, I've always believed in that type of thing, I guess, because I just generally believe in most things. And, you know, I think that ghosts do exist. It's not the reason why we made the Frighteners, however, and certainly, you know, the Frighteners is supposed to be a lot more entertaining and funny than what that particular ghost was.
I mean, there's got to be some kind of rational explanation for all this. You're next, pal.
No, gone.
I mean, that's actually quite a nice shot, though.
Do these setups, and like he did a real tight setup of Jeffrey's mouth, and it was so ridiculously funny that Jeff, you know, that Peter kept laughing and wrecking the takes.
Well, I started to giggle, and I've never told anybody why I started to giggle. The reason was I was watching the close-up of the mouth on the monitor, and I suddenly became aware of a little dribble of saliva that was forming on Jeff's lower lip. And I suddenly wasn't listening to the dialogue anymore. I was just watching the progress of this little drip of saliva as it made its way down from his lip to his chin, and I was sort of started to wonder whether Jeff had noticed it was there or if he could feel it and was just going, and I was starting to suppress a giggle. I could feel it coming, and then I think it got worse because he suddenly wiped it away with his finger, and from that point on I was just fighting, trying not to laugh, but I couldn't make it to the end of the take. I'm sorry.
Why are you shaking?
Michael Fox turned to me at one point and said, "You know, I've never been on a set where the director's giggling has made the actors crack up before."
And so then he got it under control, and then Michael went off, and so I lost it on that. So he had to take a walk, and I could even hear him like way over on the other side of the soundstage, sort of muffling a laugh.
But what about the guy in the toilet?
It wasn't me that time.
I know.
No, keep on. Here we go. And action.
We know you didn't like her.
So we finally got the mouth shot, but things didn't get any better because we moved on to the eyes, and I was in this totally vaporous kind of mood, and I suddenly started to notice as we were filming that Jeff's eyes were moving up and down in sync with his voice, so they were acting like little mouths.
28 cases involved crushed hearts, arteries choked until they burst. Those started in 1990 with your beautiful wife, Deborah.
So I'm watching these little eyes going like mouths, and I'm trying to suppress a giggle. I mean, Jeff is trying to not to laugh as well. I can see that, and that's making me laugh even harder. And so, again, that one ended in disaster.
Why are you shaking? You're doing it now.
You're looking a little pale. It's a gas station. You gotta take a leak, I do. Judge, just rest your bones.
Just that well, if you could.
Hello, Billy. 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 Hello. Billy. Hi. Hi. Smiles. Hi.
A little bit of movement, Brad.
Hi.
A little swaying, Brad.
Hi.
So
Up and down like a bouncer. Hi, Billy. Hi, Billy. 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 Hi. Hello.
Smile.
What a beautiful boy. Who's gorgeous? Who's gorgeous? Who's a beautiful boy? Yes. Who's a lovely boy? Billy. Hi. Smile.
Doesn't have a steam in.
Now, Billy! Billy!
Can we
In most of the films that I've made, we've generally had one day during the shoot, which is kind of like the silly day. On Heavenly Creatures, it was when all the crew dressed up in drag, like the men dressed up as women and the women dressed up as men, and it was kind of fun, and we've got some good footage of that for the Heavenly Creatures Laserdisc. The Frighteners, it happened on a day where we were shooting a serious scene where Johnny Bartlett's being taken to court and the massacre has happened in this hospital. It's a black and white flashback to the 60s, and we wanted quite a few extras to play policemen and journalists and cameramen, and we used the crew. So it's always funny for us to watch it because we're actually looking at a lot of the crew, you know, wearing the wardrobe and the costume and the makeup in there, and they're actually quite good actors.
Find a blanket. Give me a blanket, someone.
Can we just get back that way? Come in. Any comments, Johnny?
I got me a score of 12. That's one more than Starkweather. Guess that makes me public enemy number one.
Wait, back.
FBI guys, fighting hostage.
Get these people away. Get these people away.
Information. Can you tell us anything whatsoever? Anything that can
Take these people back.
Oh, for heaven's sakes, we're reporters, for God's sakes. We're supposed to get the news.
Into the car, guys. Follow the car. Follow the car. FBI guys, back in the car.
I think one of the biggest causes of frustration in the whole movie for Dee Wallace-Stone was the pump-action shotgun that she had to use.
Well, let's start with Dee doesn't like guns, okay? And every role I get, I have to use a bloody gun. I don't know what that's about. But I don't like guns, and this was a big gun. And they put some really loud rounds in it. I had about 30 minutes to work with the darn thing before I used it, right? And you know, you get into these scenes, Laurent, you have to go to La La Land to go from who I am to who Patricia was in this scene. It's like, ugh. So I'm doing this, and I turn around, and it goes, I think there were a few four-letter words flying around at that moment. And we tried it 2 or 3 ways, and you had to really pull the whole thing out for it to work. You know, but I would get into the momentum of the scene, and I would want to do it so fast and so professionally, you know, that I would never throw it quite as far as I had to. So by the time we really got it, I was Patricia. I was so pissed off at this gun.
Sound off like you... Will you get a load of this? He set us up, Lucy. The man set us up. This is our house. Sorry. Shit.
Oh, shit. You okay?
Yep.
No. Oh.
Lucy!
I don't know what's going on. Why did the elevator stop? Lucy had like one costume throughout the movie. So it felt, because that pink jacket, I wore it pretty much for the whole 7 months. And so after a while, the crew was like, "Oh, is that a new sweater? Oh, you look good today," you know.
And it became a bit of a joke amongst the crew that, you know, she'd turn up for work and she'd have to just wear the same clothes every single day for like 4 months at a time. And on the very last day that she was working on the film, the costume department presented her with a present, which was this little Barbie doll, and they'd made a costume, perfect miniature costume of this pink jacket, and they dressed the Barbie doll up. And I was lining up her last shot in the movie, which was just a close-up of her in the back of the cop car, and so I, you know, was looking at Trini, and she had to duck out of the frame and then come up into the frame. So we got ready to shoot it, and I called action.
Set.
Ray, honey, I need to know where you invested my money. That $16,000 that I had saved. The attorneys can't find it anywhere.
Oh, shit! I blew it on a bad investment. But don't tell her that. Tell her everything's gonna be fuck my line. God damn it! Got some stuff.
Fuck! I looked at the wrong place. I'm sorry.
In New Zealand, we have an ice cream company called Mr. Whippy who drive around in little vans and they sell ice creams on the side of the road. And they play a tune called Green Sleeves, which was actually composed by Henry VIII, for those of you that need to know. And anyway, that's the signature tune of Mr. Whippy.
Anytime I was doing, or they were doing a close-up of me, this truck would go by and make, I forgot what noise it was, some ridiculous noise. I really need to know where you invested my money. The $16,000 that I'd saved. I mean, the attorneys, I'm sorry.
What the fuck was that?
The truck seemed to follow Trini everywhere she went.
No! I'm sorry. That fucking truck follows me. That was my curse on the Frighteners.
Right from the very beginning, I set out to make The Frighteners as a PG-13. I mean, I've shot R-rated films in the past, and so I felt I had a reasonably good idea of how to shoot a PG-13. I was deliberately avoiding any explicit gore, any explicit violence, but at the same time, I wanted the film to be as intense as it could be with those restrictions, and so we did things that were non-explicit to try and crank up the tension and try and create scares, I guess, to make it frightening. When we screened it for the MPAA, we begun this very long and drawn out process of trying to get a PG-13, because at first viewing they said there's no way, this is an R-rated film. The most ludicrous thing is we had to cut out the shotgun blasts in the door. They said there's too many shotgun blasts in the door, this is R-rated. And it's the first time in my life I'd ever known that blowing holes in a door was an R-rated activity. In fact, we should stop showing these shots because this Laserdisc will be NC-17 if we carry on. It's I know Bob went crazy, and it was just so obvious to us that there was no way that we were going to get a PG-13 version of The Frighteners. Certainly not a film that we were going to be proud of.
The rating system is very arbitrary in America. It seems to be applied with double, triple standards all the time. I was shocked that the movie, well, let me put it this way. I knew that they were making a PG-13 film, but I also knew enough from having worked on as many films as I have that they were going to have a problem because there's these elements. Now, they ended up getting an R rating, and I know Peter was very frustrated by that because, as he said, if I was going to make an R-rated film, I would have made an R-rated film.
It would definitely have been more interesting to make an R-rated version of The Frighteners from the beginning. Of course, at this point, we had no time to change anything. The only thing that we did do, after we learnt that we now had an R-rated release rather than a PG-13 release, is we redid the shot of Dammers getting killed. Originally, he was just going to be shot by a shotgun, and we weren't going to see anything other than just him being blasted back through the doors. And now we had an R-rated film, I thought, well, damn it, let's just do something a little bit more interesting for Dammer's death. And we had a few weeks left before we had to deliver our last effects shot, so we engineered a shot which was never part of the original planning, where Dammer's head gets blown apart by the shotgun blast. And that is definitely a result of us suddenly getting an R rating and being able to do that.
My 11-year-old daughter went with me to the opening of The Frighteners, and she said, "Oh, it's R-rated. Is there if there's a section, I really shouldn't see, tell me." And I said, "Well, if there is, I don't know which one it is. I mean, there's a couple things which are kind of get a little violent and stuff, but I don't think it's anything that's going to disturb you. And she asked me at the end of the movie, what was it in there they didn't want me to see? Nothing disturbed me. She liked the movie a lot. And I said, Molly, I can never begin to try to second guess what adults think that young adults get harmed by. Because the problem is most adults forgot what it's like to be a child or a young adult. They've developed some concept of what it's like over the years that has nothing to do with what young people are really like. So, in fact, in my mind, in my daughter's mind, there was nothing in there that was like over the top that was going to harm her, but that's not the way the rating boards looked at it. So it's kind of a shame because it did kind of cut out a chunk of audience that I think really would have liked the film. I would have really loved that film when I was 13 years old. I mean, that was like just a perfect 13-year-old Danny Elfman movie. And I'm glad that I grew up in an era where we didn't have ratings, because I wouldn't have been able to see half the stuff that I loved.
Hollywood didn't, they didn't understand the film because it starts out like this kind of wacky comedy, and then it goes and the storyline turns to this very dark and twisted kind of thriller. And what a lot of people don't understand is those are Peter's two favorite genres.
The issue of the tone of the film also upset a few people when they saw the movie. I mean, I read reviews where the reviewer would say, you know, this film doesn't know whether it's a comedy or a horror film, and it sort of changes halfway through. That seemed to annoy quite a few people, the way that they said that the film suddenly changed its tone. I never really thought of it quite like that. The Frighteners, to me, is similar to Heavenly Creatures in the structure of its tone. In both Heavenly Creatures and The Frighteners, we get to meet our characters with some humorous scenes. We have, you know, comedy, basically. We have, you know, stuff where they're having some fun and we learn who they are. We get all that information early. And then gradually the screws start to tighten in the story. I don't think it's sudden. I just think it's gradual. Over a period of time, the stakes go up. This becomes a situation of life and death. Frank Bannister has to stop the Reaper killing people. You know, people are dying. The town is getting panicky. He gets arrested. Dammers turns up, and the mood is slowly becoming one which is much less jokey. But I think that's an honest transition, because there's nothing in the movie at that point to laugh at. That the stakes within the film itself are actually going up.
He has a great ability to combine a thriller movie with comedic action, and that's what The Frighteners was, and that was one of the reasons that I loved it. And I didn't understand why people were confused looking at it, because that's a real narrow mind when you look at a film and you say, oh, well, it wasn't comedy from start to finish, or oh, well, it wasn't thriller from start to finish. It actually, you know, gave me more of an experience to watch it, so therefore I don't like it. That's strange to me. I don't understand that way of thinking. I love The Frighteners, and I love the fact that we were able to have fun and do silly, wacky, funny stuff, but at the same time have this backdrop of complete manic insanity.
I am very proud of this movie, and I think it's brilliant. And I just think it was a pyramid of misfortunes and bad timing, and which will all be resolved, I believe, when it comes out on video, because I think people will then discover this movie for what it is. You know, this movie is very wet and atmospheric, and it has just a kind of a feel about it that's autumnal.
One of the really great memories of The Frighteners for me is, you know, working with Bob Zemeckis and Steve Starkey, who were both incredibly supportive of what Fran and I were doing. They were very respectful, I guess you'd say, of us wanting to make our film. I guess Bob, being a director himself, was, you know, particularly conscious of his role in the film, I guess, as executive producer, and he was almost painfully, you know, aware of not wanting to step on my toes at times. But he was also an amazingly knowledgeable resource when we were cutting the movie, and Bob sat in with us to look at the cut, you know, and I paused for a moment. I thought, wow, you know, here's Bob Zemeckis actually giving me ideas for my movie, and it was really that sort of input was just so helpful. And those guys, you know, worked very, very hard and were very supportive of us right the way through to the end. And, you know, I'll always be incredibly grateful and have wonderful memories of that collaboration. At the end of the day, the one critic that I want to please is myself. I want to always make a film that if I was going to watch it tomorrow, it was somebody else's movie, I was paying my money, I was going to sit down and see this film called The Frighteners. You know, I know that I would really enjoy it. I mean, that's the film I've made, something that I would really enjoy if I went to see it. And with that in mind, you know, the box office doesn't really mean that much to me. It's lovely to have people say that they enjoyed it, but at the end of the day, the biggest tragedy would be for me to make a film that I didn't feel personally proud of. That would be where I think, you know, I've really gone wrong. And The Frighteners, is, you know, I'd love The Frighteners if I saw it. I would really, really enjoy it if it was somebody else's film. And so for me, you know, it's a film I'm proud of, and that's the most important thing.